For a moment there, it's like old habit. I almost said, "You are dismissed." Some of you were on the edge of your seat. Oh, he's going to say it. Not today. We got to look into God's Word a little bit first. So I invite you to turn with me in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 3, where we pick up the story of the first rebellion against God's rule of creation. I don't like the God of the Old Testament. He's all about judgment and wrath and stuff. I like Jesus. He's all about love and kindness. How many of you have heard that before? How many of you have felt that way before? We're not as quick to admit that. It can feel that way sometimes as we read Old Testament, New Testament. But, as we continue our study today of the beginning of the ultimate true story that we're all a part of, picking up where we left off last week, looking at the rebellion of the first man and the first woman against the God of the universe. And I think as we look today at the consequences of their rebellion, we're going to see how wrong it is to hold to any kind of idea that there is this dichotomy, that there's this sort of difference between the God of the Old Testament. That the God of the Old Testament is all about justice. The God of the New Testament is all about forgiveness. Or where the Father is angry and judgmental, but the Son, Jesus Christ, is loving and kind and meek. No. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are one eternally. And God's love and His wrath, God's mercy and His justice are inseparable from each other. And we see that here in Genesis chapter 3. You cannot separate God's holiness and justice from His love and His kindness. And so we're going to dig in today. We're talking about this idea of paradise lost and a promise made. And we're talking about specifically how God's love, His kindness, is seen in this story. And this clicker's, there it is. There it is. Well, let's dig in. We're going to pick up where we left off. Right after Adam and Eve had eaten the forbidden fruit in rebellion against God's command. And just like that first part of the story, that first 7 verses started off with a conversation, so does this part. We look first at the conversation in verses 8 to 13. It says, they, the man and woman, Adam and his wife Eve, heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees in the garden. But the Lord God called out to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" The man answered, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself. And God said to him, "Well, who told you you were naked? Did you eat from that tree that I commanded you not to eat?" The man said, "The woman you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree, and I ate." And the Lord said to the woman, "What is this you've done?" And the woman said, "Well, the serpent deceived me, and I ate." Where do we see God's holy love, or His loving holiness, whichever way you want to put it? Where do we see it here? Right off the bat, we see it displayed in the way that He engages with this couple. He engages with Adam and then with Eve in questions. It's kind of ironic that they try hiding from Him. We find out in the book of Psalms later on in the Bible, it says, "Where can I go from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I go down to the depths, if I go to the farthest reaches of the ocean, even there, you'll find me." The darkness is not dark to you. It doesn't matter. God knows everything. He can see everything, and yet they're hiding from Him. And here comes God walking through the garden. Do you think God was confused about where they were? Do you think God was confused about what they had just done? Of course not. Why does he ask these questions? Why does God say, "Where are you?" Why does God play dumb, so to speak? Because he cares more about the relationship. His holiness is a loving holiness, where he doesn't ignore what they've done, he engages with them on it. He engages them with questions. He's giving them a chance to come out and confess what they've done. He's giving them a chance to say, "Forgive me. I did the very thing, the only thing you told me not to do, I went and did it." He's opening the door. He's not slamming it in their face. It's not like they ate the fruit and then God popped out of nowhere and said, "Aha! I got you. I knew leaving that tree in there. I knew I could get you with that one." No. He longs for a relationship that is built on our love for him and submission to him and his love for us. And so when his creatures that he created in his image to represent him to the creation, when they rebel against him, he comes to them with questions. "Where are you? Come talk to me." But it is a holy love. The fact that God pursues them to begin with shows that what they have done matters. He can't just let it slide. He does not ignore their sin. You know, there was a number of years ago, I worked for the summer at a place called Pine Brook Bible Conference. Many of you know about it. It's a Bible conference center up in the Poconos. And I worked there as the junior staff coordinator, or director, I can't remember the exact title. I was in charge of overseeing the teenagers that came to the conference center for the summer to work in various different ways, working in the kitchen, working in the child care areas or whatever. And part of what that meant was I got to be the bad guy. How fun. I got to enforce the rules. We had certain rules of conduct. Here's how you are required to act as you are working here at Pine Brook. And wouldn't you know it, not all of us followed the rules that summer. And so I had to enforce the rules. And actually, can I let you in on a little secret? It wasn't that hard for me to enforce the rules on everybody. There were certain kids that were just always trying to push the envelope. And for them, it's like, all right, you gotta, it was like this green, yellow, red, sort of like warnings type thing. Okay, here's your warning, you can't be doing this, you can't be doing this. That's no big deal. You know what's really a struggle for me was the kids that just seem like good kids. They're nice kids, and I like them, and they seem to be good workers, and that they're solid. They seem to want to follow Jesus, but they just made a mistake. In those kind of situations, it's easy for me to want to let it slide, to just be like, you know what? I don't want to enforce the rules here because it's a good kid. God is just. He is holy. You cannot separate his justice from his love in the same way that you cannot separate his love from his justice. And so God will not let it slide. He won't just wink at it and be like, I know you're good at heart. Do better next time. No, I need to engage. God needed to engage. He needed to address the issue. Holy love says, I care about you too much to let this slide. I need to address it. And just like he was in Eden, our God is today. He still pursues those who have turned away from him, those who have rebelled, those who have made mistakes, those who are broken. God still pursues and calls out to us. Are you listening? He says, "Come unto me, you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. Have you responded to his invitation? Or are you still hiding in the trees, in fear and in shame? What about, perhaps you already have trusted in Christ and you're seeking to walk with him, but in those situations when you mess up, you slip and fall, you do something that you know God is displeased with, when you turn back to him, do you own up to your faults? Do you confess those things to him? Or do you try to pass the blame off on somebody else? That's what Adam and Eve did, right? God engages them with questions, and instead of owning up to it, instead of Adam taking responsibility for what he's done, he tries to blame Eve. And instead of Eve taking responsibility, she blames the serpent. Who are we like? Are we like Adam and Eve? Or is the Holy Spirit tugging on your heart to confess your sins to God, to turn to him, the one who loves you with a holy love? So instead of striking Adam and Eve down the minute they ate the fruit, as he would have been justified to do, God took a relational approach, inviting them into a conversation, asking them questions, giving them the opportunity to confess and to draw near to him. And after Adam and Eve's halfway confessions, God begins to pronounce curses and outline consequences, and for not only Adam and Eve, but for all of creation. And some might be tempted to think, aha, here's where God's judgmentalism really shines through. But actually, we want to find that God's holiness is a loving holiness right here in the consequences too. Let's look at those consequences in verses 14 to 19. First, we see in verses 14 and 15, God turns to the serpent. And you notice that he doesn't ask any questions of the serpent. God's not engaging with our enemy, the devil, on this issue. He jumps straight to his pronouncement of judgment on the serpent. He says, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all the livestock, above all the beasts of the field, and all the beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life." So we see first in the consequences toward the serpent, he turns to him and says, "Cursed are you." You know, the serpent is actually the only one of the three here that God addresses who gets a direct curse. God never says to the woman, "Cursed are you." He never says to the man, "Cursed are you." He says, "Cursed is the ground because of you." The thing that you're responsible for is going to be cursed. Isn't that a picture of responsibility and leadership? When you do something wrong, it's the ones that you're responsible for that are affected. But here with the serpent, God gives him the direct curse. He is doomed to humiliation in spite of his craftiness. There's sort of a thing going on here where the serpent originally was said to be crafty. He was the most crafty of all the serpents. Well, now he's going to be the lowest of not serpents, of all the animals. He was the most crafty of all the animals, and now he's going to be the most lowly of all the animals. He's going to be eating dirt his whole life, crawling on his belly, a sign of humiliation. It's also kind of ironic that God says that the serpent is doomed to eat dirt after, what did the serpent do? He convinced the woman to eat the forbidden fruit. There's parallelism, there's sort of irony and wordplay going on here. But notice here also the justice of God. He does not pronounce judgment arbitrarily, depending on how he's feeling. He pronounces judgment on the serpent based on his actions. Because you have done this. God is just even in his dealings with our ultimate enemy. God is just in the way that he pronounces this curse on the serpent. Look at verse 15. God promises, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. The serpent deceived the woman by pretending to be her friend, right? By knowing what was best for her. Letting her in on a little secret that God was holding out. But instead, God says, for your punishment, I'm going to put enmity between the two of you. And then there's this interesting phrase at the very end of verse 15. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And we see here the first glimpse, the first hint of God's redemptive plan being put into motion. That God, in his curse upon the serpent, he promises that there's this descendant of the woman who will crush his head, even though he is wounded in his heel, it says. And we read in Galatians chapter 4, verse 4, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. Paul's point here in Galatians is to talk about how Christ is born under the law, and so that therefore his sacrifice, his death, his resurrection, the work that Christ accomplished is greater than the law. Christ was submitted to the law of God, but he also mentions not just the law, he mentions born of a woman there. And I think that's pointing back, it's referencing back to this very first reference here in Genesis chapter 3. Jesus Christ was born of a woman. He was that offspring, that seed. Perhaps your translation uses the term seed. He was the one through whom God would accomplish the reversal, the redemption of what's going on here in chapter 3. God pronounces curse and punishment, but there's a glimmer of hope. There's a glimmer of redemption, which won't be realized for thousands of years. Won't be made clear for thousands of years. God moves on to address the woman as well in verse 16. Interestingly enough, the shortest of any of the addresses that God makes. When God speaks to the serpent and the woman and the man gets the most amount of talking from God. The most amount of text. God has a lot to say to Adam, because Adam was supposed to be the one responsible for this whole situation. God has a lot to say to Adam. He has a lot to say to the serpent, not quite as much as Adam, but he has the least amount to say to Eve. But what he says is still significant. Here again, God is holy, so consequences must be applied, but his holiness is loving. And it's a loving holiness. So rather than destruction or cursing, God allows Eve to continue her mandate to be fruitful and multiply, but he multiplies the pain that she's going to experience in it. Look at verse 16. To the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. The first half of the verse there. You know, when God created man and woman, he gave them the commission. Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and all these sorts of things, right? And there's a uniqueness to the woman's role in that commission. I'm not saying that giving birth to children is the only thing that a woman is good for. That's not what's going on here. But it is part of the commission that requires the woman in a unique way that she is the one that carries the child in her body. She is the one that gives birth to this child. Man and woman are both needed in this process of being fruitful and multiplying, but the woman is significant here in a particular way. And so this pain of childbirth would serve as a constant reminder of her lack of faith. God is merciful. She and her husband will still carry out the commission that he gave them, but there's going to be a reminder. There's going to be this painful reminder that God is merciful, but that doesn't mean everything is just fine and dandy. Something has happened here. And then God also points out in the second half of verse 16 how there's now going to be a strain in the relationship between Eve and her husband. Look at that. Look at the second part of the verse. Your desire will be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Your desire shall be for your husband. What's going on here? What is God saying? That Eve is going to desire her husband more? Actually, that word desire is only used 3 times in the Bible. And the only time that it's used with this exact framing of desire being for something, and then he shall rule. Those 3 words are key. They're all working together here. Your desire will be for your husband, and he shall rule. The only time we see those 3 words used in the same sentence, the same way, is the next chapter over. Look at Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4, God is talking to Cain, the first child of Adam and Eve, who is upset because his offering is not acceptable to God. And if you know your Bible history, then you know a little bit further in chapter 4, Cain murders his brother because he's so jealous. We're going to get into that a little bit in another week or so. But God says here to Cain in chapter 4, verse 7, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, here's the words, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. The NIV, if you're reading along the NIV, you don't see the parallel as clearly because they have translated it not badly, just differently. They say it desires to have you, but you must master it. It's actually the same 3 words. So whatever it means that when God says to Eve, your desire will be for your husband, but he shall rule over you, it has to mean something similar, I think, to what God is saying here to Cain. That there would be a desire to control, a desire to step outside of the authority structure that God has put in place. And he says, but he shall rule over you. There's this... It's not a sense that God is condoning a domineering male chauvinism kind of thing, but rather that there's going to be this dynamic here now. What was once a freeing, loving submission and a loving leadership has now become racked with tension. Our sin does affect our relationships, doesn't it? Our selfishness keeps us from living in the way that God intends for us. You see, it's almost like here Eve had ignored the authority structure in the first 6 verses. She had spoken to the serpent and not looked to Adam or looked to God for what's the truth here. And so now, that authority structure would be burdensome instead of freeing. God pronounces these consequences, these judgments, because his love is a holy love. And we see that again in his instructions to the man. Just like for the serpent, God gives a reason to Adam as to why he is being held accountable here. Adam answers to God. God would have been justified to wipe Adam off the face of the map, but he doesn't. Instead, he says, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. It's interesting, just as God gave Eve increased pain in the part that she plays in fulfilling his commission to them, he gives Adam increased pain in the primary part that he plays in working the ground. God doesn't say, I'm removing all sustenance from you. He says, it's going to be painful now. You're still commissioned to do what I told you to do. You still are to go out and to fill the earth and subdue it and to tend and keep it. But it's going to be painful. It's going to be painful. Adam keeps his role in God's creation, but his pain is multiplied. What was supposed to be a joyful outworking of his role as God's image bearer has now become a painful, constant reminder of his rebellion against God. And this pain and toil are going to end in the eventual humbling of death. Look at verse 19. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of the ground you were taken, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. What did Adam think was going to happen when he ate the fruit? He thought he would become like God, right? He was going to be put level with God, perhaps. But God says, no. Actually, what's going to happen is you will die. Not right this instant, but your life will be painful and toilsome, and you're going to return to that dust. I took you up out of that dust, and I can put you back there. It's kind of a good idea. Ironically, the same dust that God told the serpent earlier that he would be eating. So the man is going to become food for the serpent later on when he dies. So much for his grand, godlike aspirations. God's holy love drives him to punish evil and rebellion in a way that is ultimately for the good of the people that he has made in his image. Far from being a vindictive temper tantrum, God's punishment is designed to show us the seriousness of our sin and to drive us to repentance. And so we need to ask ourselves the question is, when I look at my own heart and see how twisted it is, when I look at my relationships and see the twisting there by sin, when I look at the world and my work and the way that things have been twisted there, does it drive me to repentance? Does it drive me to the foot of the cross to seek the grace of Jesus Christ? You might ask the question, based on Hebrews 12, verse 10, am I willing to recognize the kind hand of correction from my Heavenly Father who disciplines me for my good? That's what Hebrews 12:10 tells us. So after God pronounces these consequences, reach the conclusion of the whole thing, we find here again God's holy love evidence. First of all, we see in verse 20, Adam naming his wife Eve because she's the mother of all the living. The name Eve sounds like the Hebrew word for living, for life. And so this is Adam stepping out in faith saying, yes, God has pronounced these judgments upon us. We experience the consequences of our sin, but there's hope. There's hope. There will be a line of people coming from us. We're not going to be wiped off the face of the map. The human race will continue by God's grace. We have offspring to look forward to. And so Eve is named living. And then God does two things. In verse 21, he clothes the couple, mercifully clothing them. The Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skins and clothing. God himself, he pronounces judgment on their sin, but then he provides by his own hand the covering for their shame. He provides the skins that they need for protection, for covering of their shame. And we can presume here, although it's not explicitly stating it, there's an assumption there that some animal had to die in the making of these skins. And so here again, we find our first hint of this idea that a substitute pays the price so that these people can be clothed, so that their sin can be covered. God mercifully clothed the couple, and he mercifully drives them out. You might not think of it that way. God mercifully drives them out. Look at verses 22 and following. The Lord said, "Behold, the man had become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take the tree of life and eat and live forever, the Lord sent him out from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword to turn every way to guard the way to the tree of life." In one sense, why does God drive them out? What is God afraid of? In one sense, he's not afraid of anything, but there have to be real consequences for their sin. In another sense, I like the way that one commentator put it. He said, the mood of the divine contemplation, in other words, the thoughts that God is having here in verses 22 to 24, is not one of fear, of usurpation. God's not afraid that they're going to take over, but rather of sympathy for the misery of the first couple that they must endure, and an assurance that their pitiful state is not consigned for eternity. Can you imagine living forever in the broken and twisted state that we are in? God says, no, I'm going to put a limit on your life. I'm going to put a limit on this pain and suffering and misery that you go through in this life. So whether it's in the conversation, in the consequences, or in this conclusion at the end of the story, you see that God's love is a holy love. His holiness is a loving holiness. And what do we do with all this? Well, I said two things. First of all, look at what God has done in your life. Trust that His holy love is at work. Don't blame God for the brokenness in your life, but understand that His holy love is at work in it. And then secondly, look to that offspring. Look to that one who fulfilled the promise given back here in verse 15. The promise of crushing of the head of the serpent. Paradise was lost for the human race as a result of Adam and Eve's rebellion against God. But hope was not lost, because of the holy love of our sovereign Creator God. We have the chance to turn to Him today in faith and be clothed by Him in the righteousness of Jesus Christ. Will we take that? Let's pray. Father, I pray that you would open our eyes to see your love, to see your holiness. Give us an accurate picture, an accurate vision of who you are, so that we might serve you wholeheartedly. Glorify your name among us.